Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my husband and co-host. And how are you doing today, Omar?
I'm doing really good. You put me on the spot, but I was just telling you, I'm trying to look at myself here on the camera if anybody's watching us on the YouTube. But Vanessa and I are wearing matching today, just all black. Any particular reason?
Back in black. You know, it could be like a subconscious response to the fact that we are moving into fall. We went to a coffee shop this morning, and they had out their like fall specialty drink list. And I'm not going to lie, I got very excited about that. Probably more excited than a person should be about fall flavored drinks. But I am basic. What can I say?
Well, the other thing, too, is, you know, we live in Florida. So today it's like 85 degrees, humid, hot. And it's just very hard for me to get into the fall mentality when it's literally 85 degrees outside.
You know what? In Florida, fall is a mentality. It's not really
it's not a season.
It's not really like a temperature change. It is truly a mentality.
Fair. I'll give it to you.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for this time of year, like especially you know, we first moved to the house that we're in right now about this time last year. And so I just remember this season being super fun because our neighborhood really goes all out for like Halloween season decorations, and I don't know, just super fun. So it's literally a mood lift to be thinking about the fact that we're heading into the fall season. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. And I was telling you the other day too, right, babe, where I'm like, I get so excited because I think we're going to host my family, maybe yours, when it comes to Thanksgiving. And I'm like, I'm already looking at recipes, and I'm like, I've already bought this grill and that. And I'm like, I'm just ready to start cooking. So
you start planning out your Thanksgiving meals like 6 months in advance.
Well, you just got to save good recipes on Instagram. But
yeah. I hear ya. Well, today we are going to talk about hypothyroidism and the thyroid in general. You know, I think for a lot of women, like when you get a diagnosis of hypothyroidism, it can feel like a death sentence to your weight loss goals. Like I remember a lot of clients who have come to me in the past and like, oh my gosh, I got a hypothyroidism diagnosis and I just don't know what to do. Like I can't lose weight, and it can feel really stressful. I think about our previous client of ours, Anne. We actually had her on the podcast at one point, so you can probably go back and find that episode. But
I'll research it while you keep talking.
Yeah, so Anne was somebody who she had been struggling with hypothyroidism for many years at this point. And when I first had a call with her, she was in tears, just relaying to me how she had gone to multiple doctors, she had seen multiple dietitians, and essentially once she would kind of tell them like, yeah, well, I have a goal of losing weight, I do have hypothyroidism, they would kind of be like, oh yeah, like it makes sense why you're struggling to lose weight. And she'd be like, well, yeah, like, okay, but like how can I lose weight? Like I'm doing this, I'm doing that, like I'm working out like crazy, I'm, you know, really on top of counting my calories and making sure I'm in a calorie deficit, like, and my weight is not budging. Like, what do I do? And they would just be like, oh, well, you just need to fix your hypothyroidism. You need to get your thyroid in a better spot. And like, you're just sorry, you can't lose weight. And she would just get so frustrated because nobody would actually help her with how to get her thyroid in a good spot. They would just give her a thyroid med, and, you know, her doctor would, of course, like recheck her TSH every few months or so, but like she was not really getting any actual direction on what to do. And it wasn't until she started working with us that everything changed. And long story short, she lost 20 plus pounds working with us. And she's a high stress person, like works a high stress job, go, traveling a ton. So I just wanted to lead with that example too, to let you know that if you are hypothyroid, it does not need to be a death sentence to your weight loss goals. You can absolutely lose weight. You can absolutely be lean and healthy and reach all of your goals. You know, 2 of the coaches on our staff have hypothyroidism, and they maintain lean bodies, and they've struggled with their weight in the past, but they know how to maintain lean bodies now as well. It's, you know, actually a very common thing. A lot of our clients have had thyroid issues, whether they are diagnosed hypo or just more so have an underactive, more sluggish thyroid. Like, you know, myself, I have a sluggish thyroid.
I think I have a sluggish thyroid too, actually, after like recent lab work and stuff that I've done. So I'm excited to learn a little bit. Sorry to cut you off there, but even I think I told you this. Like, I think my mom might also might have gotten diagnosed with hypothyroidism. So as I get to learn more, I get to teach her a little bit. So I'm excited for you to share some knowledge with us listeners.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it a little bit more. So your thyroid, I like to call it your master metabolism regulator. It's like the puppet pulling the strings on your entire metabolism. I love how you're like, as soon as I say that, your eyes are like going up. Like, what? Where is she going with this?
Well, no, I was like, wait, what's the puppet's name? I was like, oh, Pinocchio and Geppetto, his dad.
Yeah, wow, I do not remember that. But anyway, so like essentially if we actually define what hypothyroidism is, it's essentially an underactive thyroid, meaning that your thyroid is not producing enough thyroid hormone. So ultimately, you are probably going to be going to a doctor, expressing frustration with struggling to lose weight. You might have other common symptoms of a sluggish thyroid, like being very tired. Chronic fatigue is very common. A more puffy face, sometimes referred to as moon face. Often feeling cold, like if you're a little bit more temperature sensitive to cold. If you just have gained weight for kind of like no reason, you're like, I don't know why I have gained weight, whether it's suddenly or over the years, you're noticing you're gaining weight, but you can't point back to like, oh yeah, it's because I've been, really eating so much more. It's like, no, nothing's really changed, but I've been gaining weight. Constipation is very much associated with hypothyroidism.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, very common. Muscle weakness, cramps, hair loss, or just your hair not really growing, kind of like thinning out, or just not growing as much as it used to. Drier skin, very, very common. And then, of course, like a little bit of kind of like mood and just neurological things in terms of depression is common. Poor concentration is common. So like there's a lot of symptoms here. And you may also hear a lot of these symptoms do carry over into other hormonal imbalances as well. So it's like if you're struggling with any of these, I would recommend, of course, go to your doctor, get a full metabolic panel, get your thyroid checked, kind of get everything checked out. But oftentimes that's what happens. You may be experiencing one or more of those symptoms. You go to your doctor, you kind of relay those symptoms, and they may go ahead and check your thyroid. But the thing is, when doctors check your thyroid, when we say check your thyroid, typically they're only pulling TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. And TSH is a great place to start. It does tell us a decent bit of what's going on, but I like to think of it as like TSH, just checking TSH to look at how your thyroid gland is doing is kind of like if you were house shopping and you just go and look in one window of the house to be like, okay, this is the what's inside the house. This is what's going on.
This is the living room, and it looks great.
Yeah, like, oh, wow, house is definitely worth the asking price. Let's go ahead and buy it. Like, of course, looking in one window is going to be good information. It's going to tell you, some things about, like, whether or not you want to move forward with, looking at more of this house. But you're not going to buy the house and make decisions off of kind of what to do next just from looking in one window. And that's ultimately what your doctor is doing. When they are looking at just your TSH, they're just looking in one window to look at the thyroid hormone, and they're not getting the full picture of what's going on. So that's where, of course, I encourage women, still get your TSH checked at the bare minimum, but really, really try and encourage and ask your doctor. Many doctors are open to this. Some will challenge you on it for one reason or another, but try to ask them to do a full thyroid panel. For our clients, typically it's easiest for us just to order that for them. Makes it a whole lot easier. They don't have to fight their doctor over what to draw, what to not draw. But a full thyroid panel, that looks like TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, TPO and TGA antibodies. And then sometimes we'll also check iron as well. But, along with like really when we're talking about all of these different things, it's not only, and this entire episode is not only going to be relevant and helpful for those who are already diagnosed hypothyroidism, this is really helpful for also just being preventative with hypothyroidism, preventing your entire metabolism from slowing down, because it's not black and white of, once you're diagnosed hypo, now you're going to have, struggles with your metabolism. It's a sliding scale. And it's like I was saying, I have a sluggish thyroid. I think, you mentioned that you suspect you have a sluggish thyroid as well. That's going to ultimately affect your metabolic processes, your metabolism, to where if we can prevent that by, again, not just looking at one window in the house, but looking at kind of the full picture of what's going on in the house, we can be more preventative with hypothyroidism as well. And then, of course, not even to mention, if you are already diagnosed hypo, we can get your thyroid in a much better spot if we know everything that's going on. And we can say, now I can see all the rooms of the house, and I can see that room is actually going to need a little bit of work. And that's where we need to, invest into to make sure that that's picking up the speed and where it needs to be, essentially.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I mean, the other thing too, because lately I've really gotten interested in like checking my own lab work, and, you know, I'm 32, but I still feel like I'm, you know, younger. But what you were saying too, Ness, is, you know, it's not just about like whether or not you're diagnosed or not, but it's making sure that everything is optimally ready to go. Because if you are dealing with the chronic fatigue, the puffy face, or, you know, the muscle weakness, or just the unexplained weight gain, in order for things to, and correct me if I'm wrong, in order for things to really work optimally, your body has to be in a good place in order to support a healthy weight loss journey, in order to support all of these things. Because otherwise you're kind of throwing crap at a wall to see what sticks, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we can get a full thyroid panel, so, you know, especially like I had mentioned, we're checking the antibodies as well, then we can even see, okay, is there Hashimoto's going on? You know, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is essentially, you know, anytime you add itis onto a word, it's basically implying inflammation. So inflammation of the thyroid, it's an autoimmune disorder, and that can kind of help us understand, okay, here's actually what we need to be focusing on, what we need to be really kind of dialing in, as opposed to someone who maybe is just having an issue with more of like the conversion from T4 to T3, which is a very common thing as well. And again, that's why we need to check everything. TSH might be high, and to clarify, you know, if you're not super familiar with the thyroid and hypothyroidism.
I was just about to ask, what does that mean?
Yeah, so if your TSH is high, that's going to be hypo, because essentially if your body's producing a lot of that thyroid stimulating hormone, it's basically like, you know, your thyroid is slowing down. And it's like, come on, we need to stimulate this thing. So it's like producing more and more and more.
Got it.
So that's where a higher number is what actually they diagnose for hypothyroidism.
Okay, as opposed to hyper,
is
it
actually
would be
low.
lower. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so it's a little bit like backwards almost.
Yeah, yeah. And so even to clarify there too, and this is where, you know, we want to empower our listeners, our clients, everybody with education here, so that you're not just relying on your doctor to give you a vague, like, you're good, everything's normal, versus like, nope, this isn't normal, here's what you can do. If you want to be able to advocate for yourself, it's important to understand the numbers a little bit more. So doctors, when they look at TSH, they want to see it, like, typically the reference range that they're going off of is going to be something around kind of 0.3 to 4.2. So like a pretty broad range. That's what they're kind of looking for like a more normal TSH level. However, again, that is normal. What we look for when we want to have an optimal thyroid hormone that's going to produce an optimal metabolism and optimal energy, optimal ability to lose weight, and just ultimately have you actually feeling your best, we want to see TSH between 1 to 2. So even if you go and get your thyroid checked, and even if they just pull TSH, and let's say you're at a 3.5, well, according to the doctor's kind of scale there, where they're looking for 0.3 to 4.2, they'd be like, oh, everything's normal, you're good to go. And you're like, well, crap, I was kind of hoping for an explanation to why I'm struggling to lose weight here. Man, you're kind of almost disappointed by that result, because you're like, gosh, is it just me? Is it that I'm not, you know, consistent enough? Is that I'm not like diligent and hardworking enough? Is that why I'm struggling to lose weight? You kind of feel like you're back at a loss, right? Well, if you actually understand the numbers, you don't have to just take your doctor's response. You can look at the numbers yourself, and you can remember, I remember Vanessa telling me that actually I want TSH optimally to be between 1 and 2. I'm at a 3.5. So actually there are some things I need to work on. So that's great that my doctor was able to pull that for me. Now I have more information. Now I know that I can go to, you know, a functional health coach like our team, and I can actually work on this to optimize my metabolism, get myself feeling better. So you have kind of direction on next steps with things, right?
Yeah. The other thing, and sorry, can you explain a little bit more? Because when I went and got lab work, it was through like LabCorp, I believe.
Yeah.
And you were saying how every body of, I don't know what you call it, like, I guess labs, they have a different range and different reference points for every single person. So that's even another thing to consider, right? Is because, again, you know, if we're looking at a doctor and they might think it's between 0.3 to 4.2, and then you go to somebody else and their range is a little bit different, that I think is what's also so confusing for people, because you're like, well, shoot, who do I even pay attention to? Like, what's actually normal? What's actually, you know, optimal? So in order for, like, just for you to give these sort of reference points, it's so important. And I think it's so helpful for people to be like, well, it doesn't matter who I go to. I just need to know that this is where my body needs to be at optimally, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, the reference ranges, they are kind of up to like the labs. And ultimately, they create their own reference ranges off of the populations that they're testing. So that's also why we talk a good bit about how reference ranges are typically created off of more of like a sick population, essentially, because who's regularly getting their blood checked?
Yeah.
It's people who are already dealing with issues. So that in and of itself is like a factor to consider in, why it might not necessarily be the best to just go off of the lab's reference ranges. Now, for some hormones, for some things that we'd be checking, those reference ranges are perfectly fine. But for a lot of other things, we, as more of like functional health coaches, there are certain ranges that we specifically like to look for. That 1 to 2 range for TSH being one example. Another example being when we're talking about the TPO and TGA antibodies. So we want to check those to kind of see, okay, is there something autoimmune going on here? Is there Hashimoto's going on here? Well, doctors, so even if you have a doctor who's a little bit more like ahead of their time and they are checking antibodies, again, this is where it's important and helpful for you to kind of understand the numbers so you can advocate for yourself. Doctors, they just kind of ultimately want to see it like below 60. So you could be 50 and they might be like, oh, you're normal, you're good. Some doctors and again, I never want to like hate on doctors here by any means, because doctors absolutely you should still be going to a doctor. Doctors have, traditional medicine has absolutely its time and place, but when we're talking about optimizing something like our metabolism, your doctor doesn't care quite as much about that. They're more so interested in giving you medications. That's kind of more so their role in your healthcare. So ultimately, if they see, okay, you're at, we want to see it below 60, you're at 50, they're probably not even going to explain that to you. They're probably just going to be like, oh yeah, that's normal. Unless, like I was saying, if they're a little bit more modern, they might say oh, it's a little bit high, but it's normal. So you might at least get some information there. And you might be like, okay, so I don't have Hashimoto's, I'm good to go there. Well, especially if you're somebody who is regularly getting your blood checked, and that could be either, yearly, multiple times a year, or that could be even just every few years, just so that you have a history of kind of what your blood work has looked like for you individually. Let's say you've been getting a full thyroid panel, every few years. Well, you might go to this doctor, and maybe it's a new doctor, and they just glance at it and they're like, yep, you're normal, you're good. Well, then you pull up your blood work from a few years ago and you see, well, last time I got that antibody checked, I was actually a 40 and I've jumped up 20 points. And I don't know if I had said 50. Okay, I jumped up 10 points. Yeah. I jumped up 10 points. And so you can see, but it looks like I'm actually moving in the direction of Hashimoto's. So I might not be per the traditional medical doctor, it might not be qualified as Hashimoto's, but I know that there is something a little bit more autoimmune going on. And when we look functionally at things, we just want to see you as close to zero as possible, because our goal is to optimize. Again, we don't want to just have you kind of have this diagnosis and be like, okay, that's why you can't lose weight. Good luck. Bye. See ya. No, we want to get things optimal. And there's a lot of women that we've been able to actually get their Hashimoto's into remission by getting that number lower and lower and lower.
Wow. So
totally kind of an aside there, but I want to, again, my goal with all these episodes is always to empower you all with as much information as possible. And even again, this episode is not just for those who are already diagnosed hypo. So I imagine a lot of women clicked on this because they already are oh, this episode is for me. I have hypothyroidism. But you ladies, I really, really encourage you, share this one with your friends. Share this one with anybody you know who maybe has struggled with their metabolism, struggled to lose weight, maybe would possibly resonate with any of these symptoms, because all of this information is so important and applicable to everybody. You should be getting your thyroid checked so that you can be preventative of any thyroid issues. Like I just mentioned, you have then maybe a history of that blood work to compare and see, okay, is my TSH creeping higher and higher, indicating that my thyroid is slowing down, even if I'm not conventionally diagnosed hypo yet?
Yeah. Well, I mean, doesn't your thyroid play a big impact on metabolism in general?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you have a sluggish thyroid and you're trying to lose weight, I can imagine that a high-performing thyroid is only going to impact your metabolism positively to the point where weight loss is becoming much easier, right?
Yeah. Well, because, so again, when we're talking about pulling all these different lab values when it comes to your thyroid and getting that full thyroid panel, another reason why we want to be able to see our free T3, our free T4, our reverse T3, we want to kind of see how all of these are operating, is because T3 is your active metabolism. T3, free T3, it plays a role in a lot of hormonal processes throughout the body. And again, all of these different processes, all these different systems, that ultimately essentially is your metabolism. That is your ability to break down and use everything from, calories, essentially. So that's why it's not as simple as calories in, calories out. It's how your body actually can break down and use those calories that you are consuming. And that's why some people, they're like, why can my friend eat all these calories and it just seems to go right through her? Well, her metabolism, meaning all of the hormonal processes in her body, especially her thyroid, might be working super well. Whereas for you, those things might be working suboptimally. And going back to the thyroid example, it very well could be your free T3. That's the issue, because free T3 is what is essentially breaking down. It's metabolizing a lot of the hormones. One of them being cortisol, which we talk about often. Free T3 plays a very important role in the ability to metabolize and break down cortisol so you can process it out. If you are kind of somebody who, like, you feel really high stress, you tend to feel more anxious, you suspect a cortisol imbalance, like, it could also be due to your free T3 being insufficient. That's where, like, a lot of our clients, when we like to pull a Dutch test, which we can see all the adrenal hormones. We're looking at cortisol, cortisone. We're looking at how it's all being metabolized and all the metabolites. So essentially, like, your body's ability to not just produce cortisol, but actually break it down and turn it into the inactive form, cortisone, etc. Not going to go down that rabbit hole. But in order for you to actually not just produce cortisol, but actually use it and get it out of your body the way that you ultimately should be able to metabolize and break down hormones, you need to have T3 playing that role of, like, helping it be broken down. So if we don't have enough T3, guess what? You're not going to be breaking it down very well, and your cortisol levels might get higher and higher, and you might find that you have high free cortisol. So,
wow.
Everything really in the body does work in tandem, and that's why we're not a company where we kind of just focus on one part of the body. We're not like, oh, we're just going to focus on your thyroid. We're just going to focus on your gut. We're just going to focus on your sex hormones. And we have to work on all of it if you actually want to see effective long-term change with these types of things.
Yeah. So what about, like, T4? What is the role and impact on all of this when it comes to, T4?
Yeah. So T3 actually comes from your body converting T4 to T3.
Okay.
So you're basically... This is where, okay, we're talking about the role that T3 plays and how important it is. Well, that's where we want to check all these things, because oftentimes the issue for a lot of women that leads to hypothyroidism, that so essentially, like, is ultimately kind of laddering up to that diagnosis, is a struggle with converting T4 to T3.
Okay. And
so what's important to understand about that is that conversion is mainly happening in the liver. So those who have listened to many of our episodes, you know how we've talked about things like we use the flush protocol and how that really helps kind of open up your liver and helps just kind of like clean it out and get it really functionally, optimally just working, essentially. Mm-hmm. This is one example of why that's important. If you are, again, we're talking about the thyroid. Here we are. We're talking about, like, oh my gosh, I have this hypothyroidism diagnosis. My issue is TSH. Well, your issue might actually be your liver. Your liver might be essentially just, like, clogged up, just like the filter in your fridge needs to be changed out every once in a while. If that filter is never getting changed, well, guess what? It's not going to be able to filter your water very well, and it's going to get lower quality. The same thing can happen with your liver. Your liver needs to have that filter changed every once in a while and stay in a good spot. Otherwise, just one example of the liver's many processes and roles in the metabolism is that conversion from T4 to T3.
Wow. So it's so cool to see, like, looking back at your analogy, Ness, of, like, like TSH in general is just like one house, but then you're like, or one window in the house. Mm-hmm. But then if you're breaking that down and looking at T3, T4, you can ultimately see, like, start pinpointing, where the constraints are or where, like, those filters are that need to be changed. And it can go as far as, like, it's actually in your liver. And then again, what I think a lot of people do is, they just get put on medication, and then it's like, well, let's just get your thyroid to work better. But if the true root cause is never really fixed, in this case, like if it is a liver situation, then you're always just kind of putting Band-Aid on the symptoms, but you're never addressing the true root cause, which I think is what gets people so frustrated, because you're like, this doesn't work, and you're like, I don't know what else to do thing,
Yeah, well, I mean, how many women come to us who are on a thyroid medication, and they're like, Yeah, I feel a little bit better, but like I haven't really seen any change too much. Like I'm still struggling to lose weight, still, gain weight pretty easily. That's super common. And you know why that is? Because oftentimes the medication that they put you on is T4. So levothyroxine, which is also known as Synthroid, that is T4. You are giving your body T4. If your issue is actually the conversion of T4 to T3, just giving you more T4 isn't going to make a difference because you're still going to struggle to actually convert that T4 into T3, which is what you ultimately need it to be to have that impact on your metabolism.
Interesting. And then on top of that too, like I was trying to follow the rabbit hole that you were explaining, but if you're having trouble metabolizing like cortisol, for example, and obviously cortisol being the stress hormone, but on top of that, if you're also under eating and you're also like overtraining, I can imagine that just amounts to even more and more stress on your thyroid, liver, and your whole body in general. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Man, I'm learning so much today. I love
all the systems of the body work in tandem. When one thing is off, everything else is going to be, not everything else, but depending on what it is, but many other things are going to be affected. And when those things are affected, they're going to have the chain reactions, just dominoes. And it doesn't matter where you start in the dominoes, like it's basically a circle to where it's like one domino gets knocked over, they're all going to be impacted to some form or another. Like another example. So if you are estrogen dominant, if you have excess estrogen in your body, that typically will suppress thyroid hormone production as well. So it's like, again, we're not just looking at the thyroid and be like, your thyroid is sluggish. Let's put you on, T4 medication here. It's like, no, we are looking at everything going on in the body. We're assessing the whole body holistically as a whole. And we're seeing, okay, this is off. This is off. This is off. This could be causing this. That could be contributing to this. This here is impacting that. Okay, so we need to work on this. We need to work on that. We need to work on this. And we can actually essentially simplify and create that plan for our clients, which is what we do ultimately in our coaching. But let's talk about that a little bit more of like, what can you take away from this episode, or like, what are things that you can work on? Well, in order to understand what we need to do to improve, that conversion from T4 to T3, which is oftentimes the problem for a lot of women. Well, we need to understand what is contributing to it being slow, right? What is causing that conversion to kind of like get held up? Well, you mentioned one of them, under eating. That's a big one. Chronic stress in general. So like, even if you've just had a lot of stress in your life, things that are completely outside of your control, but it's been stressful. Maybe you've had even some trauma in the past, like that can absolutely affect that conversion. Nutrient deficiency. So we need specific nutrients. We need a lot of minerals. We need a lot of vitamins for this conversion process. Your body, this is why quality of food, of course, is important, but also why, there is a time and a place for supplementation. We do use supplements as we get into these types of things with clients, because you might just need a lot more, B vitamins than you are realistically going to be able to get from food. Let's say maybe you also have some gut issues going on. Maybe you're not even like absorbing the vitamins from the food you're eating very well. We might need a supplement.
Funny, one of the biggest things that I just got for my lab work was vitamin D. And considering we live in Florida, I was like, there's no way I need more vitamin D. But guess what? My lab work came back.
A lot of people are deficient.
Yeah, which I didn't realize that. So now I'm starting to add vitamin D. I'm starting to add omega-3s into, again, these nutrient deficiencies. And for the most part, we eat relatively well. But again, you never know these things until you can get the full picture of like what your body's missing in order to be able to work optimally, which is really cool to see.
Yeah. And of course, these don't necessarily have to come from supplements. So like, for example, selenium, super important for the thyroid, for some of the production of these hormones. And for
I think I know this one. You ready?
Yeah.
Where does selenium come from?
Yeah. How can you get it in your diet?
Brazilian nuts.
Yeah, 2 Brazil nuts per day will give you the amount.
Just seeing you eat so many of those things, I'm like, oh yeah, selenium.
Yeah, that'll get you the selenium you need. So that's one example, of course. So nutrient deficiencies is a huge one. Hormonal birth control or amenorrhea, so kind of losing your cycle or being on birth control to where we are suppressing a lot of those sex hormones, that's going to impact your thyroid for sure. Infections, so even like if you just recently, like we had COVID recently, or at least I had COVID.
I was never fully diagnosed. I don't know if I had
He still claims he did not, but he clearly did. But like something like that, you having an infection, fighting off a virus, that's going to impact your thyroid. That's going to impact a lot of things in the body.
Well, again, I mean, and I go back to just because I literally just got blood work like 2 weeks ago, but I think I was fighting an infection, whether it was COVID or whatever.
Well, you got blood work literally the day before you got sick.
And my white blood cell count, remember, was through
high.
the roof. And we were like, we're looking at that stuff too. But yeah it's so crazy to see.
Absolutely. Well, so now we know some of those kind of very common things that is causing that conversion to slow down. Okay, well, how do we help the body? How do we support the body functionally? Not necessarily just throwing medications at you, but like actually using just nutrition and lifestyle changes and things that are simple and not overwhelming. Well, one, we talked about, we need to keep the liver functioning optimally. So we've talked about in, other episodes, like that's where we like to use a flush protocol to really help kind of open up the liver and help clean it out. Like again, kind of using that analogy of like changing the filter on your water fountain in the fridge. We need to lower stress. So you kind of said this before, but like stress can come from over-exercising, under-eating. Of course, life stress obviously is a big thing. But this is where kind of getting your cortisol and cortisone checked. So we can do that with a Dutch test, being able to see kind of all the different metabolites. That's really, really helpful. That can be a strong indicator of thyroid health. It's not uncommon for our clients. We might get a Dutch test for them, and we might see, our free cortisol is really high, but our metabolized cortisol is low. So essentially what that means is the cortisol kind of floating freely in the blood is high, but our metabolized, like what we're actually getting out of the body, is low. So that tells us, again, we know that T3 plays a role in that metabolization. So we can kind of see, okay, T3 is something we need to work on. We're like putting more pieces of the puzzle together now. We talked about, one of the big things that kind of slows that conversion down is under eating. So this is where making sure that we are fueling your body optimally. A lot of, oh my gosh, this is such a common mistake that hypothyroidism women make, where, okay, we're struggling to lose weight. We're gaining weight pretty easily. And so what do? We're like, okay, I just need to diet more. I need to eat less calories. I just need to find the right diet that's going to make me lose weight. And what happens? It becomes harder and harder and harder, because the more you undereat, the worse condition your thyroid is going to be in, which is ultimately just this feedback loop of now it's getting harder, now it's getting harder. So what do we need to do? We need to actually feed your body up. We need to get your body back to homeostasis. We need to make sure that your body is eating sufficient calories. So that's where we'll use the flexible reverse dieting process for a lot of these clients who come to us with hypothyroidism or just with kind of indications of a sluggish thyroid, which is something we can also find just off of the symptoms that they're expressing. So a lot of women don't even know that their thyroid is sluggish, and then we do a symptom check essentially when any new client joins, and we can see pretty quickly, looks like there's probably something going on with the thyroid. We also want to make sure, like we talked about, we need a lot of these specific nutrients for the conversion process. So we want to kind of like plug the nutrient holes. We need to make sure we're eating the right types of food, the right quantities. We like to point our clients in the direction of the 80-20 principle, 80% nutrient-dense whole foods. That's likely going to get you a good amount of vitamins and minerals. Then as we get going, as we're now we know we're eating enough calories. Now we know the types of foods are in a better spot because we're looking at your food log and we're seeing about 80% of it is like nutrient-dense whole foods. Okay, cool. Now we can look and see, do we need to add any supplements in to kind of plug some of those holes? We also talked about birth control and, just the role sex hormones play in these things. That's where we might want to get a Dutch test. We might want to see, okay, is our estrogen really high? And that's kind of partly why, even though we're doing this work on our thyroid, we're not really getting anywhere. It's because we need to get our sex hormones in a good spot. Again, we're putting all the puzzle pieces together. And then, just overall, like improving cell health, improving mitochondrial health. That's going to help just overall with kind of that process. So we like to really focus on lowering inflammation in our clients. And that's a big part of getting everything in a good spot. When we kind of get some of that inflammation off, you're going to find that, okay, now I can actually start losing the body fat. So these are all things that we work on with our clients. And like I said, this does not just apply to hypothyroidism. This applies to really anybody who's probably experiencing some of these symptoms. These tips are going to benefit you. So I really encourage you, share this with your friends, share it with others who may not be aware of thyroid health, may be under the impression that their thyroid's in a good spot. Really share this with them so that we as a whole can all come to the different aspects of our medical team and come prepared to advocate for ourselves. We're empowered. We kind of know what we need, what we don't need, and we understand what's actually happening in our bodies rather than just staying in the dark and kind of worrying and stressing over, can I ever reach my weight loss goals? Because you absolutely can.
One of the coolest things I've seen lately, which I want to encourage people to do, is we've had a lot of moms that are advocating for their daughters. And they're like, hey, my daughter's dealing with this, or my daughter has been on birth control for 10 years and now she's dealing with all these symptoms. Like, how do I help her? So to your point, share it with your friends, share it with your family, because you never know who you could be helping that just has zero idea that this is the reason why they're struggling so much.
Yeah. Think of how different our culture could be if all of us women, all of us who are, starting families or have families, if we can all be kind of like the advocate for those young women within our families and help them have a different and better future than maybe we had with our
I feel
bodies.
like this is where we need to cue the Shania Twain song, like, let's go, girls.
Yep, I love it. Sing it for us. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope this episode was helpful for you. If it was, please do me a favor, share it with a friend, post it on your story, just get it out there, share it with other people. That helps spread our mission of really empowering more women so that we can have that impact, like we were saying, not just in the women we're reaching, but truly across multiple generations. So we'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, you guys.